Mercy. How we doing? Does that reach down back? What? Thank you. I'm glad somebody's awake enough to respond to my message this morning. For those of you coming in now, we have lots of seats over here on my right. And we do want to get the show underway on time. So we're going to do that. Let her go. We are gathered here this morning for a debate.
Is that it?
The topic of the debate has been known only to the debaters. And we thought we'd start off by sharing the topic with you. The subject of the meeting is programming for survival. And Bill and I have had a lot of conversation back and forth over the last couple of months, deciding just exactly what the best question was to bring that issue to your attention. And we agreed, finally, that the question we would debate, or the proposition that we would debate, is the following. Choreographic complexity in modern square dancing is limiting our growth potential. I believe it absolutely. I have no reservations at all in saying that that is a major deterrent to the growth of square dancing. And as I've walked around at this convention, I have had reconfirmed my own observations, which necessarily were based on my area in New England, that square dance growth has slowed or stopped. I read in Sets in Order that a square dance class drops from 10 sets in the first week to 2 sets at graduation time. During class, we are accepting dropouts as routine. In fact, I even this year and in past couple of years have suggested to a couple of people in my classes that they really didn't belong in this program and perhaps they should try bowling. The attendance at clubs after graduation is no greater than it was before graduation. We are routinely accepting up to 80% loss in the transition from class to club. There are some exceptions, but they're rare. The formation of new clubs, at least in our area, has, I think, gone negative. I think we're losing more than we're gaining in New England. There are dancers, club officers who rejoice at that because they have felt that a major problem was the growth and the explosion in the growth of clubs. And so they aren't too unhappy to see the dwindling number of dancers divided among fewer clubs. Just to give me a feel for whether what I observe agrees with what you observe, I'd like to know from you, just by a show of hands, how many of you feel that your square dance classes are smaller now than they were 2 or 3 years ago? How many of you feel your classes are bigger? How many of you feel it's, for the record, let us note that that looks like about 60-40. Not a drastic split. 60% feel that their classes are smaller. How many of you find that you are losing in the transition? And let me define that. That of the people who graduate from your class, the graduates are not dancing 6 months to a year later. Up to 50%. How many of you are finding a 50% loss in the transition? How many of you keep better than 50%? For the record, let it see that the 60% break goes the other way. That about 60%, maybe even 70%, are keeping better than 50% in the transition from class to club. How many of you who are finding that you are losing people find your programs in what could be regarded as metropolitan areas as opposed to rural areas? How many of you in metropolitan areas are losing in the transitions? How many in rural areas are losing in the transitions? It's clear that the transition loss is greater in metropolitan areas. Okay, as I walk around at the convention, I've talked with a lot of people who find that mainstream dancing is no longer available in many areas. Particularly some of the traveling callers have noted that dancing at the mainstream level, true mainstream, including quarterlies, if you will, is not readily available. The open Saturday night dance tends to be a +1 or +2 level. I find that in the New England area, we have a lot of clubs losing attendance. More seats on the right-hand side if you're interested in sitting down. And I firmly believe that a major reason for the dropout that we see, and what I foresee as a growing problem with recruiting, is an excess of choreographic challenge. And in this regard, I don't mean higher level dances. I'm not really complaining about the +1, +2 dance levels, because I don't think here that I'm talking about the level of the dance. I'm talking about the degree of difficulty of whatever level we're calling. And I think that that is a factor that we need to take into consideration. I think that even during class, we are finding low success rates for dancers. We find that the dancers are pushed to the breakdown point a fairly substantial portion of the time. And in my class, at least, it's clear to me that the reason for what breakdown I have is that I'm attempting to teach more in the available time than I think I can. And here, let it also be noted for the record that I do not control my own classes. I teach as an employee of a club. The clubs in New England sponsor the classes, and I think I've demonstrated successfully that I, as a caller, am not able to recruit dancers by myself. The recruits that come into the activity are brought by present-day square dancers. Callers don't recruit them. Therefore, when my club tells me that graduation is going to be just before the New England Convention during the month of April, it's perfectly clear that I'm lucky if I get more than 30 lessons in. And we're all agreed that we can't teach mainstream, the 69 calls, in 30 lessons. But when they go to the New England Convention, they're going to be dancing mainstream, or they will have very little place to dance, because we don't have available dances at less than the mainstream level. And so, I am going to be teaching faster than I would like to. I'm going to be pushing more material than I think I can cover in that time. I think we have low dancer success rates in clubs as well, because I ran around last year at the Los Angeles Convention asking a lot of you, when was the last time that everybody on the floor made it through an entire tip that you were calling without a mistake? And the answers I got ranged from 6 weeks to 6 months ago. I found many, many callers who expect some breakdown in every tip. I also found a lot of callers who didn't know, who in fact were not paying attention to the breakdown rates of the dancers at their dances. I think that a large part of this phenomenon, which I think is true, and as I've gone to dances over the past year, I've been particularly concerned with this issue, and I think that a large part of the reason that this happens is that we as callers are confusing variety with challenge. I think they're two different things. And I have been struggling with how to make that issue clear up until a few days ago, when Don Beck, who writes a regular column for the New England Caller, sent me a draft of his column for the June issue. And I suddenly found that he had said a lot of things which I felt were right on target. And I'd like to read to you from that article. This is advanced publication, and I trust none of you will run right out and steal his copyright. But Don does a lot of thinking about things, too, and you probably know him as the creator of Ferris Wheel and some others. He's interested in advanced level dancing, but he also thinks a great deal about where the customers for the advanced level programs are coming from. And it's to that subject that he addresses this article. People square dance because they, or at least their partners, enjoy it. Their enjoyment may just come from the fact that it is a relatively inexpensive night out. It may be just the good feeling that they get from being able to forget the rest of their worries. It certainly is not peer pressure that makes them dance. Maybe someday, but not today. One of the undisputed reasons, and probably fairly universal reasons they dance, is the enjoyment that comes from moving with the music, what we call dancing. Some say that they also like the challenge of square dance choreography, the mental stimulation that they get from trying to understand the combination of maneuvers that the caller is trying to communicate to them, and then in turn trying to communicate that information to the muscles in their bodies. But herein lies a potential conflict or contradiction. If a dancer accepts and expects this challenge, then he or she must expect not to meet the challenge 100% of the time, or they're not really being challenged at all. If a dancer... No, the question is, do we mean challenge or just variety? The question is, what do these terms mean? Without either, we are likely to get bored by the anticipated repetition. And I think I can safely say that most active dancers will agree that this boredom is undesirable. Variety, I feel, is when what comes next frequently takes us by surprise, hopefully to our delight. Challenge is when this surprise makes us work at making a decision to come up with the proper interpretation. Variety should therefore be possible without challenge. An analogy on this might be a comedian delivering jokes. Without the surprise of his punchlines, he would not be very entertaining. But he need not be so far out that every fourth joke is over the heads of half his audience. In other words, he needs to offer variety to your normal line of thought, but not challenge. Let us assume that a caller has the ability to call choreography at varying degrees of difficulty at a given level. Although this in itself may appear to be a contradiction to some, it is not. A given level refers to a published list of calls. The degree of difficulty refers to how these calls are combined in sequences relative to the dancer's ability to interpret the material. A caller could call anywhere from very fundamental forms of the material, as he would do when first showing something new to a class, to combinations which leave everyone standing around wondering why they left their TV sets unattended that evening. He could call material which moved along very easily, such as we frequently use in singing calls. Or the material could be just a little harder, so that even the experienced dancer was pleasantly surprised now and then. A little harder yet would have many people frequently thinking and occasionally breaking down, i.e. not dancing. Again, assuming that the caller has the ability to make the difficulty anywhere in the spectrum that he wants, where should he make it? Let me repeat. How difficult should a caller make a dance? A caller's main purpose is to entertain his audience, the dancers. Therefore, to answer this question, we must ask, how difficult should a dance be for the dancers to get the most enjoyment from it? Most dancers will say that they like being challenged a little, and that they do not mind meeting the challenge now and then. I suspect, however, that what they mean is they like variety. And if someone has to lose to the challenge, they would prefer it be the other squares, not theirs. So is a caller good if his dancers only falter infrequently? Have we then reached an optimum condition? Most active dancers would probably say yes. They can tolerate an occasional stop in exchange for just the right level the rest of the time. But we've let the word active slip in here. Let us speculate on the inactive dancer, the silent majority, the dropout. Yes, the dropouts are the majority. Shortly after class graduation, we typically lose more than we keep. We've heard numbers in print and also in conversation as high as 80% dropout quoted recently. Is it possible that some of these people would have stayed with us if they had been able to find dancing with less challenge, maybe even with less variety? Maybe they just wanted to dance. The best advice I have heard for dancers who ask if they should take a workshop at the next level up from where they are dancing is wait until you are bored with the level you're at, and then by all means. Maybe recent class graduates are not yet bored with fundamental mainstream dancing, which they have enjoyed at class balls. Yet most clubs, no matter how relaxed, are not that fundamental. Where can recent graduates go to dance? They can angel at classes. But what about just plain old dancing? All too frequently, the few times that a club will try to run this type of dance, they hire a less experienced caller than they would for their normal club dances. Shouldn't a newer dancer be given the benefit of dancing to better callers also? It may even be more important for new dancers than it is for experienced dancers to have a good caller. Is a dancer any less of a caller if he calls an easier dance than he is capable of calling? Whose responsibility is it to provide a place for recent graduates to dance? And Don ends with a question, who should be allowed to dance? I think that's a good question. I think that we have a far greater complexity in our square dance choreography than we need to keep our dancers entertained. I think we have settled on complexity rather than variety. And I think one of the reasons for this is that our callers have come up through square dancing interested in choreography. Most dancers are now learning from callers who have never really experienced the sense of smoothness and flow that is true dancing. Most of the callers throughout the country, although we find the average here is somewhat higher, but most throughout the country who are teaching our customers have started dancing within the last 10 years. And during this time in square dancing, challenge and complexity has been king of the mountain. We certainly have put a great deal of emphasis on the development of advanced levels of square dancing. These current day callers have come from a fairly unusual group by virtue of the fact that they survived class. They further selected themselves by surviving the transition from class into club. And most of them, many of them, came into calling because they were fascinated with the geometry and the patterns, what I call puzzle solving. I think that the puzzle solving aspect of modern choreography is what intrigues a very high proportion of callers. As an example of this, I offer the fact that most caller schools that I have observed or been associated with have put an inordinate concentration of the attention of their program on choreography. The reason that most callers go to caller school is to learn how to handle the choreography, how to keep the geometry straight. Very seldom do you find callers who come to learn how to make the timing better, or the dancing smoother, or the program interesting without causing complicated patterns. Another example, Lee Koppman has given demonstrations at CALLERLAB conventions. They have been outstandingly successful, demonstrating how to make even simple calls complicated. I think it is the attitude of most callers that choreographic challenge is fun. I think the callers believe that. And that's not surprising, because they have indeed selected themselves out of the system on the basis of their own personal fascination with choreographic puzzles. Many have not danced long enough before they started calling to really experience competence at any dance level. They have started calling, and unfortunately this often means stopped dancing, before they had become really competent dancers at any level that was available. What we see in the calling profession and in our dance population, our customer pool, is the survivors of class and the transition to club. Our current square dance program, what we offer throughout the country, ignores dropouts. And I think most of us would agree that nationwide the dropout rate from class, from the start of class to a successful club dancer, is at least 50%. My personal view is that it's a good bit higher than that. We seldom ask the question, how do we save a higher percentage of the people we recruit into square dancing? We've talked about it in the past, but our concentration here at CALLERLAB and in many other areas of caller training has been on what can we do for the people who survived. We've paid very little attention to what we can do for those who found our program too challenging. Varied, but too challenging. Southern Ontario has operated in the past on a program which was very successful at overcoming this dropout rate. The key to that is they teach more slowly. They don't attempt to bring people to an experienced club level, whatever that is in your area, in 1 year. They take 2 years to get there. And that has made drastic inroads in their dropout rate. They have a higher success rate than most other programs. I've seen that happen in New England in the past. We've had 3 or 4 programs which based their development of the club on a 2-year program rather than a 1-year program. And in every case that I've seen such a program, it has had a higher success rate. Bill Kastner, the late Bill Kastner, said about 10 years ago when we had articles running around cursing the flow of new material, not to worry. We're growing like crazy. We don't have to complain. We don't have to apologize for our program. It's growing like a weed. Are your programs still growing? Do you think square dancing is still growing? I think we're having trouble recruiting people into classes. And I know that in New England, a large part of that trouble arises from the number of enemies we've made. People that we have run through square dance class saying, you're going to come in and have fun and friendliness and you're going to enjoy dancing. And once they get out of class, we gave them none of those. We didn't let them dance. And the fun went away as they tried to overcome their shame at not being able to dance successfully. What we gave them was not variety, it was challenge. It was a variety that was complicated beyond their ability to handle it comfortably. I believe absolutely that choreographic complexity in modern square dancing is limiting our growth potential. And I thank you for listening.
You silver-tongued rascal, you. As Jim has indicated, I do indeed see things a little bit differently. And I'd like to begin by telling a little story about a very fancy finishing school for young ladies, probably in New England. And the graduation exercise for these young ladies at this finishing school, the way they determined that these young ladies were ready to enter the outside world, was kind of an oral exam. They asked each girl in turn this one question. They posed this hypothetical problem. If you suddenly found yourself on a desert island as the only girl with 100 sailors, what would you do? This one year, there were 3 young ladies ready for graduation, and they asked each one of these girls this question, posed this problem in turn. And the first one said, well, I think what I would do is I'd find a cave and hide. And the panel made a note of that, thanked her, brought her the next young lady, asked her the same question, posed the same problem, and she thought about it for a while and said, well, I think what I would do is I'd find the strongest sailor that was there, and I'd attach myself to him, and he'd protect me, and I'd have no more problems. They made a note of that. Third young lady was a little French gal. They asked her the same question, posed the same problem. She didn't say anything. Asked the question again. You're on a desert island with 100 sailors, what would you do? Did not answer. Yvonne, don't you understand the question? I understand the question. What's the problem? Whenever I'm questioned about whether the, admittedly, increased emphasis in choreographic complexity is limiting our activity's growth potential, I'm afraid I'm a little bit like that French gal in my story. I understand the question. I really fail to see that the problem is that big or that serious. It seems to me that if you truly feel that choreographic complexity is bad for the activity, if you really feel that the current trend toward more complexity seriously limits or impedes the growth of your own square dance program, you can you not, totally on your own, very quickly solve that problem, at least as far as you are concerned. You simply see to it that all of your dances from here on out are totally devoid of complexity. And if Jim Mayo is right, if his side in this debate is the correct one, then it shouldn't be very long before most of the dancers in your area will be buying tickets to your dances rather than to anyone else's. And you will very quickly have become the most popular caller in town. So when you come right down to it, I think that that is the essential principle. That's the bottom line box office concept that has got to be the only really valid test that we'll ever have to properly determine whether, in this particular debate, Jim Mayo or Bill Peters is on the winning side. For if it is true, as Jim suggests, that most of our dancers are being forced into complex choreography against their will, if it really is something that they do not enjoy doing, then it must follow that those same dancers are simply not going to support those callers who regularly feature choreographic complexity in their dance programs. And if, as Jim also suggests, most of our dancers would truly prefer to attend dances where their ability to solve geometric puzzles is not consistently challenged, then it must also follow that those same dancers will go out of their way to support those callers who make it a point to keep geometric puzzle solving to an absolute minimum. I say again, if some of you, even most of you, or even all of you out there agree with Jim, then I encourage you, I urge you, do as he suggests. Simply eliminate complexity from your dance programs altogether. For that is the one surefire way to prove that Jim is right and I'm wrong. For I do indeed hold a decidedly different view. While Jim and I, interestingly enough, usually find ourselves on the same side of the fence in just about every other square dance argument, on this particular issue we do disagree. I believe that choreographic complexity is one of the two very critical things that our dancers do enjoy about square dancing. I believe, in fact, that this very unique opportunity that square dancing provides for its dancers to regularly test their ability to solve choreographic puzzles, that is the very thing that sets square dancing apart from all the other forms of dance recreation. And this is why I further believe that choreographic complexity of one kind or another must therefore be regarded as an absolutely essential and a wholly indispensable ingredient in any successful square dance program. And if you tell me to play it down, if you tell me to de-emphasize its importance, if you tell me to make puzzle solving a dirty word, if you tell me to make challenging choreography the whipping boy for anything and everything that may or may not be wrong with square dancing, then I'm very much afraid that I think what you're telling me to do is to throw out the baby with the dirty bathwater. I think we have to ask ourselves exactly what it is that square dancers find so attractive about square dancing. What precisely is it that keeps bringing them back, time after time after time? I personally believe that the answers to these questions go to the very heart of this particular debate. And I think maybe you ought to take a minute here to really analyze the essential nature and the basic character of square dancing itself. What, in fact, is its real appeal? I believe you'll find that of all the many recreational activities that the human mind has devised, square dancing is the only one that allows us to gratify simultaneously two very basic and two very fundamental human pleasures. It provides us first with the opportunity to enjoy the fun of simply moving to music. Square dancing allows us to respond to the sometimes almost hypnotic beat of the music with an equal or corresponding rhythm of our own. And throughout the history of mankind, that has always been an extremely pleasurable experience. It is, as a matter of fact, what dancing is really all about. Any kind of dancing. And it's beyond question one of the oldest and one of the most primitive sensory delights that is known to man. And while I must in all honesty agree to some extent with Jim when he tells us that we are not today emphasizing the music as much as we used to, there can, on the other hand, be no question about the fact that modern-day square dancing still provides us, still allows us to gratify to a very high degree the purely sensory pleasures that we all derive from moving to the music. But that really is only the half of it. Because the real fact is that the pleasures of moving to music and of responding to its rhythms actually represents only half of the total pleasure that the average square dancer enjoys about square dancing. And that is one of the very things that makes square dancing so unique. For we could certainly gratify our needs to move in rhythm by engaging in just about any other form of dance activity, couldn't we? Ballroom dancing, disco, folk dancing, you name it. And it will always, at the very least, provide you with the opportunity of moving to music. The thing that sets square dancing apart from all the other dance forms is that in addition to the purely sensory stimulation we derive from moving to a square dance rhythm, square dancing also stimulates the intellect. Square dancing is the only popular dance form where the dancers do not know beforehand what the steps of the dance are going to be. And that's a very significant point, because when it happens that the dancers do know ahead of time what the steps are going to be, when a caller's choreography has become predictable to the dancers, when the dancers find that they can second-guess the caller, that's when square dancing begins to lose some of this very special uniqueness I'm talking about. That's when square dancing begins to compromise its ability to provide intellectual stimulation. And that, in my view at least, could turn out to be a very serious, if not actually a fatal problem. For it is in the very nature of square dancing to require its dancers to play a kind of game with their caller. Square dancing asks its dancers, in effect, to solve a constantly changing puzzle that their caller defines for them. And it asks, in addition, that they solve this puzzle in a kind of joint venture team effort with 7 other cooperating dancers. And the fact is that when we're all able to solve the puzzle successfully, and when we have all done that in a very rhythmic and highly musical environment, that, too, is an enormously pleasurable experience. That combination, solving the puzzle with music, really provides a fantastic high. And it's a high, incidentally, that you can only get from square dancing, because that high is solely derived from that very special balance I've been talking about, a balance of both sensory interest, moving to music, and intellectual interest, solving the choreographic puzzle. The very fun of square dancing lies in the fact that you can't have one without the other. If you do, it isn't square dancing. In square dancing, you need them both. And this applies to square dancing at any level. Beginner class, mainstream, +2, advanced, challenge, I don't care. The real fun of any kind of square dancing comes from the fact that it allows the dancers to gratify both pleasures, musical and intellectual, simultaneously. I believe that the very essence of square dancing lies in the fact that it is a blending, a marriage, if you will, of these two highly potent pleasure sources. And it is this blending, this very marriage, that we all enjoy so much. And what this says to me is that any caller who seeks to divorce that marriage by constantly favoring one of its pleasures to the detriment of the other, that caller, in my opinion at least, will find it very difficult to keep the dancers entertained for any appreciable length of time. It would, for example, be my guess that any square dance program that constantly goes overboard with puzzle solving or choreographic aspects of the activity, while simultaneously de-emphasizing its musical or dance-like characteristics, that kind of program generally will have very little chance of succeeding with the average dancer. It may, to be sure, be occasionally attractive to a small group of puzzle-solving fanatics, but it can never provide any real kind of sustained appeal for the average dancer. On the other hand, we must never lose sight of the fact that the reverse is also true. If we constantly bend over backwards to overemphasize square dance's musical nature while simultaneously downgrading the importance of its choreography, that kind of program will also, very quickly, bore the average dancer. Because in square dancing, intellectual stimulation is not only desirable, it is an absolutely essential and wholly necessary ingredient at any level in any successful program. Which means that to be a successful caller these days means that you are going to have to keep your dancer's interest alive, but always making sure that your choreography, in addition to being smooth-flowing and well-timed, is also going to provide the right amount of intellectual interest. Which is to say that the puzzles you ask your dancers to solve should therefore also be appropriately complex. But let me very quickly also add that they must be appropriately solvable. I do not mean to imply that your choreography should therefore become so complex that the dancers just can't do them. That would be foolish, because the dancers would find that to be an intellectually frustrating exercise, and that, of course, would defeat our entire purpose. I guess what I'm saying is that we have to make our puzzles hard, but not too hard. The dancer must be made to feel that he's been in a fight, that he has really been doing battle with his caller, for that is part of the fun of square dancing. But he must also, on the other hand, be allowed to taste the sweet fruits of victory. He wants to come out of that battle a winner. Not necessarily all of the time, but certainly for most of it, because that, too, is part of the fun of square dancing. Now, I know that might possibly sound like a contradiction in terms, that I say on the one hand you have to make your dances hard, but then I also say you can't make them too hard. And when I say make them easy, I also very quickly say you can't make them too easy. What isn't that exactly what today's caller has really got to do? And as a matter of fact, isn't that just exactly what the art of square dance programming has always required throughout our history? Now, I would wholeheartedly agree with Jim if what he is saying is that there are many callers in the field today who are guilty of bad programming judgment because they are going way, way overboard on choreographic complexity. But to my mind, that turns out to be an entirely different question. Because the problem there lies not in the fact of choreographic complexity, but rather in the uneducated and in the unenlightened way in which complexity is currently being programmed by some callers. And to me, the solution to that problem is not to do away with choreographic complexity, but to rather train and to educate those callers in the best way to program their dancers. Let us not, in our haste to deal with things that are wrong, upset the things that are right. Because we really don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. And we don't want to push the panic button because some callers are misguided or just plain inept. All of which brings me back to the original subject of the debate. Is choreographic complexity limiting our growth potential? I don't think so. I first of all do not believe that our dropout problem is as serious as Jim Mayo seems to suggest. I want to pause here for a minute. I wrote that particular statement, before I came to Miami. Jim has accused me in California of wearing rose-colored glasses. I didn't believe it. I couldn't believe that our situation was so unique. I've been talking to many of you out there. I'm no longer as sure as I was when I put that to paper. Maybe the statistics are right. I will concede that. And assume that they are. I don't personally believe that the large numbers of people are dropping out of square dancing because its choreography has become too complex. As a matter of fact, I suspect that I am more inclined to believe that the opposite is true. That more people drop out of square dancing because they find the choreography has become too simple. If we're going to blame choreography for the dropout problem, then I have the very distinct feeling that more people drop out of square dancing because they have become bored with the dull, tepid, uninspired, and almost totally predictable choreography that their callers have been dishing out. More drop out for that reason than drop out because their callers have made the choreography too difficult or because they've become too demanding of their time. The way I see it, every caller today is being asked to walk a very delicate and a very precarious tightrope. And if he leans too far in either direction, he will lose that precious balance I've been talking about, and his whole act goes right down the tubes. But that balance is precisely what successful programming is all about. And I think it's always been that way. Throughout our history, the successful caller has always been the guy who's been able to make the right decisions about how much challenge was too much, about how much was not enough. It's always been that way. You can be sure that it will always continue to be that way. And if you tell me that it's becoming increasingly difficult to exercise that kind of good, sound programming judgment these days, I would have to agree with you. But that doesn't change anything. That's the way the world is today. And where does it say that a caller's job must always be easy? Effective programming decisions are tough to make, and getting tougher all the time. But that, too, goes with our territory. That's part of our job. My programming decisions, therefore, will always be to include a healthy dose of choreographic complexity in every dance that I call. Because until you can prove to me that the dancers truly dislike complexity, that they truly dislike puzzle solving, until you can prove to me that they are really offended or repelled by choreographic complexity, I'm not going to change my mind. Let me also say that I think that at least some of what Jim says is right, and I therefore think that's important for each of us to periodically review our programs and our attitudes to see if maybe we aren't giving our dancers a bit more choreographic complexity than they really want. Because that is, to be sure, very easy to do these days. But on the other hand, we should also regularly examine our programs and our attitudes to make sure that we aren't actually boring our dancers with dull choreography, to make sure that we are indeed providing them with enough choreographic complexity to keep them interested. Because the inescapable fact is that the dancers truly enjoy having their choreographic skills tested. Not the opportunity to test their skills is one of the main reasons that people come to a square dance in the first place. Let me say in conclusion that I think it has become somewhat fashionable these days, in some quarters at least, to blame complex choreography for all of square dancing's problems. I sometimes wonder if maybe it hasn't also become a bit too easy for us to alibi our own lack of professional competence or diligence by saying the reason people drop out of square dancing is because our callers are being forced to make the choreography too complex. Is that truly the real reason? I wonder if maybe we just don't say that because it's easy, because it sounds good. Remember, there's a mighty big difference between good sound reasons and reasons that sound good. I thank you for your attention.
As usual, Bill and I end up not as far apart as we would profess to be.
Cut that out.
But I see in what you say a couple of things that confirm what I say. The first of these is that the problem I'm talking about is not the customers we have. It's the customers we don't have. And I think it's in that way that our appeal to the interests of the customer pool that has survived our screening process has prevented those who didn't want that degree of complexity from staying in our activity. And I think it's the ones we didn't keep that are the focus of my concern with regard to the growth potential. And I have to say that I believe, by and large, we are overemphasizing the intellectual and underemphasizing the sensory appeal that square dancing has to offer. And I do believe that that's a major part of our dropout reason. I think because, as I said, I see most callers having come into the activity because of their personal interest in the puzzle solving. I believe that the puzzles in our normal programming are too often not sufficiently solvable, to use your terms. I think that we have made people play the complexity game to a degree more than they would like. I agree also that very often programming is boring. But I think that's because it lacks variety, not because it has too little challenge. We would very much like to have you join in the debate, and I think the way to do it's clear. Line up at the microphone if you got something you want to say. And our first candidate is here. You're going to... Yeah, he's loaded for bear, I can tell. But you got to tell us who you are and where you come from first.
Not Billy. I'm Al Edmonds from Wichita Falls, Texas. I can't say that you gentlemen disagree a great deal on what you're saying. We need to keep sanity in square dancing. Back in Amarillo, Texas, in the late 40s and early 50s, we had square dance championships. We'd be 50 squares there, and they'd all dance, and we elected whoever was the best. You know, somebody was the champion. This is the way we do in sports. But you know, down in Dallas, all this bloom, nobody's getting anymore because Roger Staubach decided not to play. And we're in trouble. But now, the great thing about square dancing is that everybody's a winner if we callers make it so. We don't have any losers. Everybody has a good time. Everybody goes home happy. And I don't fuss with the challenge level at all, because people that dance 5 nights a week need them. People that dance once a month can't do it. And to me, you gentlemen are disagreeing particularly. And what we need to do is, when we as callers, to try not to put the competition in square dance. We find in our area, if you advertise a mainstream dance, nobody goes, not even the mainstream dancers, because everybody says, huh, you don't dance running too? What's the matter with you? Dummy? You know? So they go to one or two dances, they can't quite cut it. And so I say, we callers, it gets back to our own good judgment. And going to the same thing, and I think that the problem today in drop-offs is not due to solely to the callers. In fact, the callers are probably only a very small part of it. But if the callers do have some effect as far as the drop-off rate, I think the big problem comes from trying to mix one-year dancers with more experienced dancers, and I feel that what's interesting and challenging to the one-year dancer is probably not interesting and challenging to the 2, 3, or 4-year dancer. When you graduate a 3-square class into maybe a 15-square club, and you're calling, you don't see those 3 squares in the back that are not making it. You see the other 12 squares or 15 squares in front that are making it. This is one of the problems, is the difference of experience between the new dancers and the experienced dancers.
What would your solution be to that?
Well, I guess I try to get myself into the habit of looking and see what the people in back are doing. I've tried that, and if there's a lot of trouble in the back, I try to mix the floors, and I also try to provide at least 2 or 3 tips during the evening, which I feel the floor is making it 100%. That's all I feel I can do. I also feel that the dropout rate is not necessarily due to callers. It has to do with clubs as well and how they receive the dancers. This is my personal feeling. This is what we more or less decided in some of our talks with the Callers Association and my church.
Thank you.
I'd just like to speak about our area. In our area, I think that we have a lot of misuse of calling out of the level. And this is kind of frustrating a lot of cases. But also there's another problem of higher level clubs forming. And now the mainstream clubs are forced with recruiting new dancers and facing the turnover of their dancers moving to higher level clubs. And the dropout problem looks higher than it really is. They're losing their leaders, and some of the people have been in longer mainstream to the higher level clubs, mainstream 1 and 2 in advance. And these clubs that are not doing anything to bring in beginners. The mainstream clubs in our area are forced to double up on what they were bringing in as beginners to support the higher level clubs. So somehow or other, the higher level clubs need to start doing something about bringing in new people.
Jim West in Spokane, Washington. I know Bill personally, so I'm glad I can take a little point against his side.
See, I got some support. How about that? He's from Spokane. What are they?
Okay, I think Bill's story illustrated my point as I was listening to it, because 2 girls had no problem. Knew the problem. French girl had no problem. But the problem was quantity, not anything else. So I think this is the only thing. The problem is it's not the complexity. It is the number of new names that first-year dancers have to learn to dance to the mainstream dance. And just as a point of information, in our own area, I'm real surprised that all singing hall dances are getting more popular and are very well attended. That there was a time when I would have figured that that's not even dancing to go to an all singing hall dance. But they are becoming more popular.
I wonder why. Let me also observe again that the complexity I'm talking about, does not depend on the number of terms. I think we're making our mainstream dancing too complicated. Our class dancing.
Tom Potts from Massachusetts. With all due respect, if I could believe what Bill says, that the reason they come to dance is for the challenge, for the choreography, I think we're in very, very serious trouble with the career.
Bob Elling from California. I would like to just comment on one thing that I've been doing, and it reflects both sides of the story here. I call for 2 clubs, and as Jim, I'm a club employee, and I do as they want. One club is strictly +2. It has a beginner class, and when they have to learn all the +2 figures before they join the club, all the way up through.
How many weeks do you get to do that?
They give you a whole year to do this. Okay. The second
Big spenders, aren't they?
do what you're paid to do. Okay. The other club has a beginner class, a Main Street club, and a +2 club. 3 years ago, each club had 8 squares. The +2 club, after 3 years, still has 8 squares. The club with the plateau has 28 squares today, because we allow them to dance mainstream until they feel that they're bored and they have to move on. Okay, some people even choose to stay there or drop for +2 down to mainstream. We have people that dance both nights because they enjoy dancing regardless of what the degree of difficulty is, just so long as it remains dancing. And I believe it works. And I owe a lot to Jim because I got a lot of magnets from previous seminars that we did that. Thank you.
Let me emphasize again that wherever I see the transition being made easier, that same pattern shows up.
My name is Jane Carlson. I'm from Western Massachusetts. And I think part of the problem is not necessarily the choreography. I think it's the way of life. I think things have gotten so complex in everyday life, the getting home at night, the businesses, the jobs, and everything else. I think a lot of the problem with the dancers is they get home, they're tired, and it's too easy to turn on the TV and relax or go to the movies or a disco or something like that. And I think a lot of the problem is that we haven't made it easy for the dancer to come, as well as and consider his problem with his job.
I'm Lucky Shotwell from Detroit, Michigan, and I'm inclined to agree with Bill in the sense that I think that the choreographic complexity can help, because a star through is a star through and a swing through is a swing through regardless. The problem comes is that there's been, in my estimation, that too much emphasis is put on these levels, and like Al Evans said earlier, you advertise a mainstream dance, and the dancer just looks at that as just a low-level dance. In other words, not anything that they can have any challenge, anything to really tax their brain with at all, and consequently they say, you can't go there. Then they go on up to the next level, and in the plus levels, or into advanced, and they find that they're still breaking down. And I think the dancer basically is looking for a place to dance that he can dance at without breaking down. And this is the problem. They try to get up into a level that they can't handle because they don't dance often enough. They get up to a level that they can't handle, and they say, what's the fun of standing around waiting for the element left? And they get out of it because of boredom in that sense. In other words, there isn't enough in a level that they can handle that they can enjoy.
Paul Fisher from Michigan. I'd like to congratulate both of you gentlemen on a fine job this morning. Good preparation, as the gentleman last night did. I think that 20 years from now, if we're all gathered here in the same room, we'll be talking about the same problems.
20 years ago?
Yeah, you bet.
I gave that talk 20 years ago.
I remember it.
I didn't win then either.
You know, we have, of course, a myriad of talent in this room, and we talk about the callers being so involved with how we conduct the business. Who needs square dancing? That bothers me. I am not a professional caller. I work with General Motors, so I kind of give them more time than I do for calling. However, I often ask this question because we need square dancers, but do they need square dancing? So you have to concern yourself with how much control do we have over the people. We can start out in the embryo stage, and we talk the fun, and we take them up little at a time. And you may work a year, and you haven't got them to club level yet, but you spend a year with them. You kind of suggest to the dancers who've been around a while, hey, when you take them out, be sure you select the place to take them so that they don't get clouded. But they don't. The peer groups, we have peers all over, both in square dancers as well as callers. And it'll always be there. We have to use good judgment. That's the keynote of this whole convention. It'll always be there. We have areas where we try to give the variety of dancing to what we call it a lower level. However, they aren't too successful because people are driving or callers are driving the other direction. It'll always be there. Just use good judgment. Try to keep the most people we can in this activity. Remember, we need square dance.
Well, let me just throw in a comment that most of the places I go, the beginners' dances are the biggest dancers in the area. Then why do we stop running them?
Steve Staub from Pennsylvania, and I'd like to say I agree with everything that you say 100%, Mr. Mayo, and I hope that...
Anybody ever call you Mr. Peters? Dan Selden.
The age difference.
Send him out.
Between you and he, not those.
Let's change the whole subject.
I hope that someday it will require all over the country at least a 2-year period to go to the plus level, because I believe what we're learning here is an activity that is very tough to learn. One of the hardest activities I think there is to learn, and what we're teaching here is really tough. But I think the problem is going to be that until everybody as a whole agrees to this idea and uses it, it's not going to work, because if you just have like one club out of a whole area doing such a program, it's going to, people are not going to want to take their dancers to such a program, because they say, gee, it's going to take so long to learn. When you get there, let's go over to so-and-so's where, like 6 weeks, we're doing all the mainstream and what have you, and into the plus stuff. So I think until everybody as a whole conforms to this type of lesson program, I don't really see how it will succeed. But I hope someday that we do get to a point where it takes 2 years to reach that level of dancing plus level.
I promised myself I wouldn't rebut, but I couldn't agree more, Steve. I think that one of our major problems truly is that we're not keeping our classes long enough, that the training period, that the amount of time that we keep our dancers is much, much, much too short. 2 years would not be too much. Not enough even. Is Jack Murtha in the hall, by the way? Jack Murtha? They're looking for you. She call in the front, would you? Yeah. I think that's a very serious problem, and we keep saying very negatively, we can't do anything about that. I can't get a school for longer. My club won't let me keep my beginners as long as I want to. We really haven't addressed that problem. I firmly believe that if we wanted to solve that, if we wanted to right now say, all you guys here, when I get back, I'm going to see to it that I'm going to train my beginners for 2 years, we could make it happen. I think what happens is this. I think right now we are training our dancers for 2 years. If what you're saying is your club's at a 2-year level, it takes 2 years to train dancers to enter your club, well, those dancers in your club have been dancing for 2 years. What you've done is you gave them a diploma at a much earlier time, but you continued their lessons under some other guise, and in the least effective circumstances. That's what we're really doing. And I think if we stopped that facade and simply said, hey, guys, it flat takes 2 years plus to do it. Let's go make that happen. I think it would. Go ahead.
Pete Ellis from New Hampshire. I guess a couple of things. Number one, I think any caller who says
He is a paid employee of this club. Does this club a disservice. We have got to be leaders in this activity. If we're not going to be leaders, then we are just paid employees. If the 2-year program, as Bill just talked about, is going to happen, it's going to come from us, not from the dancers. You're not a paid employee. You're a leader of this activity, and we better start acting like it. My second point, I guess, is that I'm like the gentleman from Spokane. I'm from Jim's home state, and I guess I have to agree with Bill.
I'm not quite sure what it is. Right.
The gentleman from California who talked about his club, the 28-square club with the plateaus. Think about what he said. He said that dance at that level until you're tired of it. They weren't tired of the dance, of the tactile, of the dancing to the music. They were tired of the challenge. He's exactly espousing what Bill has said all morning. That what we want to do is keep people in a given level until that challenge is no longer a challenge, and then we are saying to them, go find more challenge. That's what you want to take out of the activity? No, don't take that out. We need that. If you think about what you say every time you tell a dancer to go up or to stay where he is, go until the challenge continues to be a challenge for you, and then stay there. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about challenge dancing. We're talking about the idea that you are comfortable with solving that puzzle. No matter how simple that puzzle may seem to you or I, it may be challenging for someone else. And I think we've got to think about it that way. I would like one of the gentlemen to do one of the things for me. I had a very rude awakening the other day at a meeting. I asked for show of hands for the number of men who had called a mainstream dance, not a +1, not a +2, but a mainstream dance in the last 4 weeks. Was absolutely astounded at what I got. I wonder if one of you gentlemen would ask this crowd.
Ask it.
Yeah, could we have a show of hands of people who have really called a mainstream dance in the last 4 weeks?
I call them every week.
Look at this. Do you believe this is the people who tell you that +1 is the way to go, folks?
Very good, Pete. The name is Happy Harry Trott from Rochester, New Hampshire. And even though that fellow happens to be from my swing state, I disagree with him from the standpoint that I am a hired hand. I'm a full-time fellow, and he's tough to tell me what I'm going to do. Or I don't work, and I need the bread. So I have to do what they say. Now, okay, now, number one, I have 2 clubs that are actually going to fold in a very short time. Basically, because they went from mainstream plus the quarterlies to +1 and 2. We danced 9 squares at each club. We are down to 3 squares because the people feel that they cannot keep up with it unless they dance 2 or 3 times a week. All right. So that's one thing. The other thing is I think CALLERLAB and ourselves are guilty in a way of this problem. I believe that the level definition was fine. But we always had challenge, but we had it in a closet. All of a sudden, we opened up a bag of worms. And everybody took one of their friends in when they were not qualified to, or could actually handle that level of dancing. But they were too ashamed to come back to their club once they found out they couldn't make it. So you eliminated some of your graduates as dropouts, really, right? And then another thing I have against, in our area there's a lot of clubs. One thing I object to is a caller coming into an area and starting a +1 and +2 club on his own. In an area where it's saturated with clubs that only dance 7, 8, 9 squares. What happens is he takes a square from your club, a square from your club, a square from yours, and a square from yours. He dances 10 or 12 squares, beautiful. He's making a buck, but he just folded 6 clubs.
Jim and Bill, excuse me.
Is that the Lady Godiva side?
tremendous presentation here. At least, if you don't agree, it got your thinking glands going. I think the key of what was said this morning was said by Jim when he said, our concern is the people who have dropped out. Now, we're talking about maybe 10%, 20% of the people that have come in. I hope you don't get me wrong in what I say. I think that we are being dishonest. I get, I don't know how many samples of folders recruiting people into classes. And I can't remember in how many years, in looking at these, that I have seen anybody say, come to a class that's going to take 40 weeks, that you will then have to take 2 years, that you will then be challenged. Now, it is my concept that a person comes to square dancing not for challenge. He gets that in the daytime. He reads it in the newspaper. He gets it on television. He comes for relaxation. He comes for recreation. And he comes for friendship. Now, I fail to hear this enter into what Bill Peters was saying. But look, I think that until we reassess where we're going, that we are not leading. I really feel that our job, which is the subject of this whole thing here this week, is on the wrong track. And it doesn't matter whether you take your orders from your dancers or whether you are a leader and pleasing your dancers so they don't have to give you orders. I think our direction has to be reassessed. I don't think it's built on a great number of new movements. I think it's built on holding the people and pleasing those 80% are dropping out. You are thinking, and that's what's going to make the change. Thank you.
Erwin Norman, Whitesville, New York. Why do I always get programmed to follow somebody like that? I guess it is, yeah. I don't know what the solution is. I wish my name was Sullivan Socrates, and I could stand here and expound on some values view or approach. But I'd like to be the devil's advocate just for a moment. Have we, at CALLERLAB, created a monster by establishing level identification? Why can't we perhaps just go back to square one?
Mike Gilden, South Carolina. I've been listening to all of this. All of the talk has been either plus or minus, but it all revolves around the same thing. And we really don't know what is the reason why we had dropouts. There's a lot of hypotheses that they could be true or not. The thing that really confused me is that I haven't heard any really constructive statements about saying, hey, this is one way we can cut it down, the rate down so that we can have more people interested in having it. Bob Osgood said the right thing as far as I was concerned. The question that I want to know is, how do you sell a 2-year program to a person that has never seen a square dance before?
I'd like to respond to that.
Yeah, that's a question that I'd like to have an answer.
I'm not saying this is the right answer. It works for me. I teach a 42-week class, and at the end of that time, I give them a diploma, bring them into the club, but in my head, they're still in lessons. And they are that way until, at that point, the club level comes down, the class level goes up, and they merge. That's my own operation at home. And I teach a beginner class every year. When they ask me about the third or fourth week, and I don't tell them how long it's going to be. I say, come on down, have fun square dancing. Learn how to square dance. It's a ball. The few who do ask me, how long is this going to take? I double talk. I say, well, yes. I count that as a compliment. I take that as a compliment because I'm suggesting to you that you develop that technique. That's a constructive comment. Develop that technique. I tell them, well, I don't know. Last class they didn't take quite that long. It was, there weren't quite as many movements then, but let me see. By that time, they're so...
you're good at it.
By that time, they're not quite sure what I'm saying, and they kind of feel maybe they shouldn't have asked the question in the first place. But I watch them very carefully to see that I want to keep them smiling all evening long. If 2 weeks later I told them at the end of 20 weeks we're going to stop this, you can't square dance no more, they'd have my head on a platter because they're having a ball. Once they're enjoying it, the question to them becomes totally academic. They feel at that point, where has this been all? We've all seen the phenomenon. Where has this been all my life? How come I now suddenly discover square dancing? It's like a kid with a brand new toy, and he's so happy he's fat. He's just delighted. And we lose that, I think, because we tend to rush, because we tend to accomplish too much too quickly.
Make it too complex.
Make it too dull.
How many angels do you have that come along with you to help you out with your class?
Sir?
How many angels do you have that come out with your class?
Excuse I can get away with.
And you think this is sort of leads into the second question that I had. You know, once you do get them all out at a certain level that you might think either was the level that you say is sufficient enough to get them into the class or into the club, what do you do about the peer pressure that pulls these people away to, oh boy, let's go to so-and-so who's doing a +2, you can do it, go, come on, you know? And they keep on getting this. And, you know, that's another how-to. How do you do this? And as a hired hand, how are you, how do you have to become a hired hand and not be the leader?
I wish I had a magic pill to say, take that pill and it'll go away. I don't. I can only tell you what my gut feeling tells me is the only solution to that. That guy who's pulling your dancers away because he's offering something else is indeed competition. And I recognize the peer pressure, and the only solution that I see is for all of us to do the best job that we possibly can to compete harder, to keep the interest on our side, to keep the dancers staying where we are, so that whatever is being offered on the other side of the fence, that pasture does not look greener. He's very happy where he is. I don't think there's more of a solution than that, personally.
Let me take a piece of that also. I think that Bill said in his talk that the way to handle the problem is to provide an easier dance and see if people come to it. I have been doing that in a hotbed of advanced level recruiting, and the club that is most in the forefront of that battle is doing better than it has ever done before. I think that the answer to the question is, if you follow his advice or his suggestion that you run an easier dance and more people will come to it, that in fact they will. In fact, he does it.
Yeah, well, you see, you folks are talking from a metropolitan area. When you get into a rural area from where I am, you're lucky that you have 4 squares of square dancing within a 100-mile radius, you see, so you have to draw from all of these things.
You can't afford to throw away as many people as I can. Be good to them.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, but they go ahead and they go over to Columbia.
We'll run out of time.
Okay.
I'm more along with the National Athletic Committee, and needless to say, I am not a caller. So I'd like to put the question here to the callers that are here. How many in this room feel that you are crowding your dancers and giving them fast, giving them too much information too fast? I'd like to see a show of hands. I think that's is the answer right there, really. The reason you're losing a lot of the dancers is you're trying to push them too fast and they get discouraged. You need to give them more time, and as Bill said, he's got a 42-week program going, and I don't know how he gets a 42-week program because it is hard, especially in a rural area, to get people to commit themselves to 42 weeks. And I know it's hard to get people all in per club, to get the club to go along for this amount of time. But it's still a communication problem. If you can get the picture across to these people, the clubs and the callers and the associations, that they're going to have to give them many lessons, and maybe they don't have to go for the 42 weeks. Maybe they double up and go 2 lessons a week, and then this cuts your period of time down. But I think the answer is that in order to cut your dropout, you're going to have to slow down a little and give them a longer period of time to absorb it. Thank you.
runs 42 lessons because he runs his own class. We would appreciate any help you can give us in persuading dancers that classes should be less speedy, that we should not have to cram so much into such a short period. You have access to the dancers. Please help us send that message. We're going to run out of time at the end of the line where it is, so I'm afeared that you may have gotten it in if the rest of the people talk rapidly. We got to quit at 10:20, 5 minutes from now.
Okay, Jack Cook from Wayland, Michigan, and I think that we're taking the blame as callers for a lot of the dropouts that really we're not to blame for. We have a lot of dropouts because of work schedule changes, because of family problems, of sickness, that we have to take in this other group of dancers that perhaps we are driving out for some neglect. But I think that really our dropout is as much due to us as it is perhaps personal problems or work problems or financial.
That's a cop-out.
All right, fine. Now, the next thing.
Quick.
How many people have seen a new kind of a waltz? The waltz is still a waltz. The polka is still a polka. I don't see why we have to change our square dancing so much if we show them a good time. I think the continuation of class in a summer program has been successful for me. Take my new dancers out, give them a summer program where they can continue their education, and we keep them. Thank you.
Chuck Master from Augusta, Georgia. I think one of the solutions as far as the +1 to +2 dancers might be what is being done in the Augusta area. Before they can go and join a +1 or +2 club, which I believe there's only one in there right now, is that they have to maintain membership in another club, which has to be a mainstream club. And I think this is part of the solution. And if we as callers allow this to happen and they drop out of the club, then we're falling down on our job.
Jim Kramer from Oklahoma. I think in our area particularly, because everybody talks in individual areas, the biggest problem with dropout is the fact that even though they drop out within, say, the first year, first 18 months of square dancing, the biggest reason they drop out is because we as callers have failed to instruct our dancers in proper commands. When we graduate them, they don't really know what they're dancing. They get through it, but that's about it. They get out to a certain club and somebody else calls it a different manner. They know the movement when we call it and somebody else calls it, they don't. We take more time, more emphasis on our fundamental basic problem of teaching people how to square dance. Because if you don't teach them how to square dance when they start, 20 years from now, they're not going to do it right the first time.
Bill said they wish we had a magic pill to solve the problem. And I think many of our dancers are forming as a found one. It's called bridge, it's called bowling, it's called skiing, and it's not called square dancing.
It's not challenging.
Yes, it's not challenging.
Dorothy Branch from Fort Wayne, Indiana. I feel that one way, my husband and I feel that one way to keep our first-year dancers happier is to structure it in the manner of a club, have a pre-mainstream club. It gives them more status, they're happier to wait if they feel they already are in a club. Then those who want to stay in that club may know that want to progress into mainstream, they do so. And my other thought is that it's the very nature of our activity that gives us the problem in this respect, that people don't want to have their lives that structured that they have to attend this regularly. This is what I think loses them rather than what kind of a program we give them. So what do we want to do? We don't want to cut off all new figures. That would be the only way to keep the mainstream level all the time.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you all. Before you leave, I'd like to thank you all for your attention. I'd like to also ask you a question by a show of hands. Did you find the